She was a black woman in a world built to overlook her. Brilliant, composed, holding together the empire of a man who deceives everyone around him, and felt nothing for any of them. Or so everyone believed. It was an ordinary Friday on the 42nd floor when Tiana Caldwell walked into that conference room. Tall, radiant, unstoppable. And the room went silent. Not because she'd done anything wrong, because she existed, and 3 of the most dangerous men in Atlanta couldn't look away, and neither could he. Jung Min-jun, Korean mafia boss. A man with dragon tattoos climbing his neck and the names of the dead carved into his skin. A man who had never once, in 10 years, allowed himself to feel anything for anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He simply said, "Button your shirt." And the room stopped breathing. She thought it was control. She thought it was arrogance. She thought he was just another powerful man who believed he owned everything within his sight, including her. She had no idea that one of those men had already been asking questions about her, where she lived, whether anyone would miss her. She had no idea that what she mistook for possession was the only form of protection he still knew how to give. But what she did next, the moment she walked back into his office and refused to be small, that was the moment everything between them cracked open in a way neither of them could take back. And what he told her, in the stillness of that 42nd floor with Atlanta glittering below them, changed them both forever. Before starting the story, comment here from where you were watching and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. The city never slept. Not really. Atlanta breathed at night the way powerful men breathed in boardrooms. Slow, deliberate, controlled. As if exhaling too fast might reveal something. 42 floors above the glittering sprawl of Peachtree Street, the offices of Cheongsa Imports hummed with the particular quiet of a place that had learned, long ago, that silence was safer than noise. Tiana Caldwell had learned that too. She had learned it on her first day when she walked into the executive suite and found Jung Min-jun standing at the floor-to-ceiling window with his back to her, hands folded behind him, watching the city the way a man watches something he owns. She had learned it when she set the briefing documents on his desk and he didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her presence, simply said, in that low, measured voice that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than his chest, "You're 3 minutes early. Adjust your schedule accordingly." Not thank you, not good morning. Adjust your schedule accordingly. She had gone home that night and told her mother she'd made a terrible mistake. Her mother, lying in the hospital bed they'd converted the living room to hold, had laughed until she coughed. "Baby," she'd said, "terrible mistakes pay the rent." So Tiana stayed. That had been 14 months ago. 14 months of learning the architecture of a man who had built himself like a fortress. Every entrance sealed, every window reinforced, every soft edge deliberately hardened into something that would not yield. She had learned his coffee order before he told her. She had learned that he read contracts twice, once fast, once slow, and that the second reading was when he found the things people tried to hide. She had learned that he never raised his voice, and that this was, somehow, more terrifying than if he had. She had also learned, though she would not have said this out loud to anyone, that there were moments, rare and brief, when the fortress showed its cracks. The way he paused, sometimes, when his phone rang with a number from Seoul. The way he set it face down without answering, then sat very still for exactly 30 seconds before returning to whatever he'd been doing. The way his jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, when someone on his team laughed too loudly. Not with irritation, but with something that looked, to someone paying close attention, like grief. Tiana paid close attention. It was, she had decided, the most useful thing she could do in a place where information was currency and observation was survival. She was thinking about none of this on the Friday that changed everything. She was thinking about the Henderson file, which was overdue, and about her mother's next appointment, which was Thursday, and about whether she had left the stove on, a thing she worried about constantly, despite having done it exactly once at age 19, when she pushed open the door to the third-floor conference room and walked into the silence. There were 3 men she didn't recognize sitting at the far end of the long glass table. Korean, all of them, in suits that had the particular sheen of money that didn't need to announce itself. They had been talking when she entered. They stopped the moment she crossed the threshold. The stopping was immediate, total, the kind of silence that has weight. Tiana was not unaccustomed to being noticed. She was tall, and she moved through rooms the way women move when they have spent years understanding that their presence is always either an asset or a target, and have decided, with full awareness, to make it an asset. The gold hoops at her ears caught the light as she turned toward the table. The white button-up blouse, which she had chosen that morning because it was Friday, and Fridays in this office were the only days that felt remotely like they belonged to her, had come untucked slightly at the collar. 2 buttons open. Maybe 3. She registered the men's attention the way she registered most things, with a kind of quiet, watchful clarity, and set the Henderson file at the end of the table without making eye contact with any of them. Professional, precise, the way Min-jun had, without ever saying so, trained her to be. She was turning to leave when she heard it. Caldwell. 1 word. Her name. But the texture of it, the specific weight he placed on the second syllable, stopped her in a way she couldn't entirely explain. She turned. Min-jun was standing at the window. She hadn't noticed him when she came in. He had a way of occupying spaces without announcing himself, as if the room simply rearranged itself around him and always had. He was still facing the glass, one hand resting against the frame, and for a moment she thought he was still talking to the men at the table, until she realized the men at the table were looking at her, and Min-jun was looking at her reflection in the glass. He turned slowly. He was wearing the black suit he reserved for meetings that mattered. She knew his suits the way she knew his voice, by what they signaled. This one meant the men in this room were being evaluated, not welcomed. His collar was open 1 button, just one, and the edge of the tattoo at his neck was visible beneath his jaw. The tail of the dragon that she knew, from the glimpses she'd caught in moments not designed to be glimpsed, climbed all the way to the soft place behind his left ear. His eyes moved from her face to her collar. Not with desire, not with the lazy, assessing look that the man in the gray suit at the far end of the table was using. With something else entirely. Something controlled and flat, and, underneath that flatness, something else she couldn't name yet. Button your shirt. The room went very still. Tiana felt the heat rise in her chest. Not embarrassment, exactly, but something adjacent to it, lit with a faster, sharper current. She was 27 years old. She had weathered things in this city that would have folded other people in half. She was not a woman who was told what to do with her own body by men who had not been asked. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then, because she was also a woman who understood leverage and timing, she reached up, slowly, deliberately, and buttoned the collar. Not because he told her to, because the way the man at the far end of the table was watching her had just shifted from admiring to something with an edge in it. And she had learned, in 14 months, to trust Minjun's instincts, even when she didn't yet understand them. She left the room without a word. But her hands, she noticed, were very steady. And her heart, which had no business behaving the way it was behaving, was not. The elevator doors closed behind her, and Tiana stood alone in the mirrored box as it descended 1 floor to her office level. And she looked at herself. Really looked. The way she rarely allowed herself to do in the middle of a workday. The woman in the reflection looked composed. That was the thing about her face. It had learned, over years of necessity, to arrange itself into composure regardless of what was happening underneath. Her mother had called it her boardroom face. Her college roommate had called it intimidating. Tiana called it survival, but her eyes gave her away, if you knew how to read them. She knew how to read them. She pressed the button for the 42nd floor again, rode back up, and when the doors opened, she walked directly to Minjun's office, knocked once, a single, clean knock, and opened the door without waiting. He was behind his desk. He had moved fast. The meeting must have concluded, or been suspended, because he was alone, jacket still on, reviewing something on the screen in front of him, with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who had never once in his life rushed through anything important. He looked up. "With all due respect, Mr. Zhang," Tiana said, and her voice was level, the boardroom face fully operational. "You are not my father." Something moved across his expression. It was brief, the briefest flicker, and then it was gone, sealed back behind the glass. "No," he said. "I am your employer. And as my employer, you don't have authority over how I dress." He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man searching for words. Minjun never searched for words. He selected them the way he selected everything, with deliberate precision. But the quiet of a man deciding how much to give. He leaned back in his chair, looked at her in a way that she felt across the entire length of the room. "One of the men in that room," he said, "has logistics connections in 3 countries that none of their governments have been able to document. The second has, on 2 occasions that I am personally aware of, arranged for individuals who became inconvenient to him to become permanently unavailable." Tiana did not move. "The third," Minjun continued, his voice dropping just slightly, not for effect, but with the particular quiet of someone saying something that costs something, "spent approximately 20 minutes this afternoon asking my head of security, not me, my head of security, because he was being careful, who you were, where you lived, whether you were attached to anyone." The room was very still. "I didn't say you were wrong," he said. He turned back to his screen. "I said button your shirt." Tiana stood there for 3 seconds, 4, 5, long enough that any other man in that building would have shifted in his seat. Minjun did not shift. She turned and walked out, and when she reached the hallway, she exhaled. Slow and quiet and entirely controlled. And she thought about the way he had said the third, and the weight behind it. And she understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, that she had not been corrected. She had been protected. The problem with that realization, the thing that made it complicated, the thing she turned over that night while her mother slept and the apartment was quiet and the city hummed 14 floors below, was that being protected by Jung Minjun was not a simple thing. It was not the protection of a kind man. It was the protection of a man who had decided, for reasons she did not yet fully understand, that she was something he would not allow to be touched. And that was either the safest place in Atlanta to be, or the most dangerous. She decided, with the particular stubbornness that had gotten her through her father leaving and her mother's diagnosis, and 3 years of a corporate world that had told her in 100 silent ways that she was tolerated rather than welcomed. She decided she would figure out which one it was. The following Monday, she arrived 8 minutes early. Min-jun was already there. He was always already there. She set his coffee on the desk without being asked, the way she always did, and she pulled up the calendar and she said, in the same level, professional voice she used for everything, "The Cheongsa board is expecting the quarterly review by Thursday. You have a conflict Wednesday evening. Move the conflict. The conflict is your dinner with the Lim family." A pause. Brief. Move the quarterly review. She made a note. She was turning to leave when he said, without looking up, "The third man won't be returning." She turned back. "For the meetings," he added. "His involvement with this office has been concluded." Tiana looked at him for a moment. "Understood," she said. She went back to her desk. She sat down. She stared at the calendar on her screen and felt something settle in her chest. Quiet and warm, and entirely unwelcome. Over the days that followed, she began to notice the architecture of what he was doing, the way she had begun to notice everything about him. Slowly, in pieces, each piece making the picture slightly more complete and slightly more unsettling. He began rerouting certain client meetings, not dramatically, not in ways that anyone would flag. Min-jun was too precise for drama. But the men who had made her uncomfortable, the ones with the particular quality of attention that she had learned to identify from a doorway before she'd even entered a room, those men began to have scheduling conflicts, began to be handled by the senior associates instead, began quietly to disappear from her calendar. He never mentioned it. She never mentioned it. But she knew. And he knew she knew. And that unspoken knowing sat between them in every room they shared, in every meeting where he handed her documents without looking at her directly, in every elevator ride where they stood at opposite walls and the silence was exactly the same as every other silence, and yet, somehow, entirely different. 3 weeks after the conference room, she was working late. The floor was empty. It had been empty for 2 hours, which was the way she preferred it. The particular luxury of a building full of people finally belonging to her alone. The city through the glass was doing what it always did, glittering indifferently at its own reflection. The Henderson report was finally finished, printed, stacked. She was shutting down her computer when the sound reached her. Not loud, not the explosion of movies. A sharp, compressed crack, twice, from somewhere below, muffled by 40 floors of steel and concrete and glass, but unmistakable to anyone who had grown up in the kind of neighborhood where you learned early to identify that sound without being told what it was. Tiana went very still. The lights in the corridor didn't flicker. The elevator bank across the hall sat quiet. Everything on the 42nd floor continued exactly as it had been, which was the thing about this building, this office, this world. It maintained its surface with extraordinary discipline, even when what was happening underneath it was tearing apart. She was standing at her desk, very still, when she heard footsteps in the hall. Fast. Not running. Min-jun's men didn't run, she had noticed. They moved quickly the way controlled things moved, with urgency that had learned to disguise itself as calm. She turned toward the door, and then the door opened. And it wasn't one of his men. It was the third man, the one who had been removed from the calendar, who had been quietly, efficiently concluded. He was standing in the doorway of her office in a suit that was no longer as pressed as it had been 3 weeks ago, And he was looking at her with the particular expression of a man who has decided that if he cannot have what he wants through proper channels, he will take the back ones. He smiled. It was the worst kind of smile. The kind with no warmth in it at all. "Tell your boss," he said in English that carried the careful precision of someone who had learned it as a weapon, "that the bill has come due." Tiana did not move. This was the thing about her, the thing that had confused people her entire life, employers and professors and men who had underestimated her in 100 different rooms. She did not perform fear. She felt it, certainly. It was there, a cold current running beneath her sternum, quickening something in her blood. But her face did not give it a stage. She looked at the man in the doorway the way she looked at everything that required her full attention. Steadily, completely, with the particular stillness of someone cataloging rather than reacting. He was broader than she remembered from the conference room. Closer, he looked older too. Lines around his mouth that hadn't been visible from across a glass table. A tightness in his jaw that suggested he had been clenching it for a very long time. His tie was loosened. His jacket had a quality to it that she identified, after a half second, as displaced. Like a man who had been wearing it somewhere he hadn't expected to be and had not had time to change. She thought about the sound she had heard 40 floors below. She thought about Minjun's head of security, who was almost certainly dealing with whatever that sound had been. She thought, I am alone on this floor with this man, and no one knows I am here. And then she thought, someone knows, because Minjun always knew. I'll pass that along, she said. Her voice came out exactly the way she intended it. Flat, professional. The boardroom face extended into her vocal cords, not defiant, not trembling. Simply present, the way a woman is present when she has decided that panic is a luxury she cannot currently afford. The man's smile shifted. He had expected something else from her. She could see him recalibrating. You're very calm, he said. I work in a very calm office, she said. He took one step into the room. Just one. But the geometry of it changed everything. He was no longer in the doorway. He was inside, and the hallway behind him was empty, and the elevator bank was 20 feet away, and her desk was between them, which was something, though not as much as she needed it to be. He keeps you close, the man said. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her from the conference room table, but without the table between them, the quality of it was different, heavier. I noticed that. A man like Jang, he does not keep people close. Not unless they are useful to him in a very specific way. I'm his executive assistant, Tiana said. Useful is literally my job description. Yes, he said. I imagine it is. The way he said it made her jaw tighten. She let it tighten. She didn't look away. She was calculating. The desk, the door, her heels, which were not ideal for running, but which had solid enough structure to be useful in a different application if necessary, when she heard it. The elevator. Not the sound of it arriving, the sound of it having arrived, the soft mechanical exhale of the doors opening, and then footsteps in the hall. Not fast, not slow, but with that particular controlled urgency she had learned over 14 months to identify across a crowded room, through a closed door, in the dark. The man heard it too. She watched his posture change. A subtle thing, a tightening across the shoulders, a slight shift of his weight. And in that shift, she saw something she hadn't expected to see in him. Not aggression. Fear. Minjun appeared in the doorway. He was not disheveled. This was the thing that struck her first, in the way that strange details strike you when your nervous system is running at full capacity. He was not disheveled. His suit was exactly as it had been at the beginning of the day. Jacket on, collar precise. The single open button at his throat revealing the lowest edge of the tattoo. His face was the face she knew. Flat, controlled, a surface of absolute, deliberate calm. But his eyes, when they found the man in her office, were not calm at all. They were the coldest thing she had ever seen. "Mr. Yoon," he said. His voice was so quiet she almost had to lean forward to hear it. "You're in the wrong room." Yoon turned slowly. He had the bearing of a man who had spent his life in rooms where his presence alone was enough to shift power, who had walked into negotiations and boardrooms and back alleys and always been the most dangerous person present. He was trying to access that now. Tiana could see him reaching for it, and she could see, with a clarity that surprised her, that it was not working. Because Min Jun was not afraid of him. Not slightly, not at all. Not in any register that Tiana could detect. And she had become, without meaning to, an expert in the subtle language of what Min Jun felt beneath what he showed. "The bill," Yoon said, steadying his voice. "You know what I'm referring to." "I know exactly what you're referring to," Min Jun said. "We'll discuss it. Not here." "I chose here." "Yes," Min Jun said. "I know why you chose here." The silence that followed was the kind that has architecture. Rooms inside it, weight-bearing walls, the entire structure of what two men know about each other, built into a single, held moment. And then Yoon looked at Tiana. One last time. The look of a man making a point to another man using a person as the instrument of it. Min Jun moved. It was not fast. It was not the theatrical speed of action sequences, bodies colliding and noise filling every corner. It was simply decisive. He crossed the room in 3 steps and placed himself between Tiana and Yoon with a completeness that left no interpretation available. His back was to her. She was looking at the back of his suit jacket, at the precise line of his shoulders, at the place on his collar where the tattoo disappeared upward into his hairline. "My office," Minjin said to Yoon. "Now." Yoon straightened his jacket, looked at Minjun for a long moment with the expression of a man who is deciding whether the move he wants to make is worth the cost of making it. Then he looked past Minjun's shoulder, directly at Tiana one more time, a look that said, "This is not finished," and walked out. Minjun did not move immediately. He stood with his back to her for 3 full seconds after Yoon left the room, and she watched his shoulders. Watched them with the attention she gave everything about him. And she saw something she had never seen before. A breath. A single, deep, controlled breath, taken when he believed no one was watching. Then he turned. He looked at her face first, her hands second, checking, she realized, for trembling. She kept them still on the desk surface. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." He nodded once, looked at the doorway, back at her. "Go home," he said. "The Henderson report." "Tiana." It was the first time he had used her first name. In 14 months, through every quiet corridor and tense boardroom and early morning briefing, he had called her Caldwell, or nothing at all. The sound of her name in his voice, low, stripped of everything except the direct, undecorated weight of it, hit her somewhere she was not prepared for. She gathered her bag, her coat, The small, wine-colored purse she hung on the back of her chair every morning like a small flag of something that was entirely hers. She walked toward the door, and she stopped beside him. Not in front, beside. Close enough that she could see the texture of the dragon's tail at his collar. Close enough that she was aware of him the way you are aware of heat sources when the temperature drops. "What does it mean?" she said. She wasn't entirely sure in the moment why she asked, only that she had been wanting to for months, and the night felt suddenly like one in which the normal rules of what she permitted herself had loosened. He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. "The tattoos," she said anyway. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. And then, in the same voice he had used to say her name, the voice with nothing performed in it, he said, "They are names." She looked at him, waited. "People I failed to protect," he said. The city glittered beyond the glass, indifferent and enormous, and Tiana stood in the doorway of her office on the 42nd floor and looked at the man beside her, at the fortress she had spent 14 months studying, and she saw, for the first time, clearly and completely, what the fortress was built over. Not power, not pride. A grave. She went home. She did not sleep. Her mother was awake when she arrived. She often was at that hour, the medication making her nights restless and long. And Tiana sat on the edge of the converted hospital bed and held her hand in the dark without explaining why. And her mother, who had raised her to survive things without narrating them, did not ask. In the morning, Tiana dressed with particular care. Not because she was trying to be seen, because she had decided, somewhere in the sleepless space between 2 and 4 in the morning, that she was done performing smallness in rooms where she had earned the right to take up space. She chose the white blouse again, pressed, clean, 2 buttons open exactly as they had been 2 days before, and the black pencil skirt, and the nude heels, and she put on both gold hoops, and she stood in front of the mirror in her small bathroom for a moment and said nothing. Only looked, and then picked up her wine-colored bag and walked out into the morning. She was at her desk by 7:52. Min-jun arrived at 8. She heard the elevator, then his footsteps, then the particular sound of his office door opening, a sound she had cataloged without meaning to, the same way she had cataloged everything else. He did not come out immediately. He rarely did. He needed the first 20 minutes of the day alone, she had understood early on, the way some people needed coffee and others needed silence. Min-jun needed both, plus the 20 minutes in which the world was not yet demanding anything of him. She gave him 25. Then she picked up the Henderson file, the quarterly review amendments, and the revised calendar for the following week, and she knocked on his door. 1 knock. Clean and direct. "Come in." He was at the window. Of course he was. Atlanta was doing its morning thing below, gray and gold and beginning to move, and he was watching it with the particular stillness she had once read as coldness and now understood was something else entirely. A man standing at the edge of something. Every morning, standing at the edge of something. She set the documents on his desk and turned to leave. "Sit down," he said. He hadn't moved from the window. She sat. It was not a thing he had asked her to do before. Not like this. Not sit. Not the informal weight of it. The implication that what came next was not an instruction or a briefing, but something without a category in the 14 months of language they had built between them. He turned from the window. He looked at her for a moment. Not the way the men in the conference room had looked at her. Not cataloging, not assessing for weaknesses or angles. Simply looking. The way you look at something you are trying to understand completely before you speak about it. Yoon has been handled, he said. Handled, she repeated. He won't come back to this building. She nodded. She understood, in the vocabulary of this world, what handled meant and what it did not mean. And she had made a choice 14 months ago to work inside that vocabulary without asking for translations she didn't need. Okay, she said. What happened last night, he began, was not your fault, she said. He stopped. The flicker again, the brief, bare visible thing that moved across his expression in the moments when he had not fully controlled the speed of his own reaction. I was going to say, he said slowly, that it should not have been possible, that there was a failure in the security rotation that I have already corrected, that you should not have been in that room alone. I know, Tiana said, and I know that's true. But I also know it wasn't your fault. And I'm saying that because I think you need to hear it, not because it changes any of the structural issues. The silence that followed was different from the silences she knew. It had a different quality, open rather than sealed, like a door that had been pushed just slightly off its latch. You are very strange, Minjin said. There was nothing unkind in it. It arrived instead like an observation made by a man who had not expected to find anything new and had found something anyway. I've been told, Tiana said. He crossed the room and sat, not behind the desk, beside it, in the chair that faced hers, the one that visitors sat in when he was deciding whether to trust them. She had watched him use that chair as a signal for years. He had never sat in it across from her. The names, he said. He was looking at his hands, then at her. On my neck. She waited. My sister, he said, was 23. Her name was Ji-young. She had nothing to do with any of what I do. She was in graduate school, architecture. She used to send me photographs of buildings she loved. Old ones, crumbling ones that nobody else thought were worth looking at anymore. He paused. She was killed because of me. Because someone wanted to send me a message, and she was the clearest way to send it. The city continued below them. A siren somewhere, very distant. The muffled percussion of a world that did not stop for grief. I have her name here. He touched the left side of his neck, just below his jaw, so that I never forget what it costs. When I am careless. When I allow myself to believe that the people near me are safe simply because I have decided they should be. Tiana looked at him. At this man who had spent a decade building a fortress over a grave and calling it control, calling it power, calling it protection. And she felt something that she recognized, because she had felt it before. The particular ache of seeing someone clearly, completely, without the mercy of distance. You weren't careless with her, she said. You were human. There's a difference. In my world, in every world, she said, and the firmness in it surprised even her. Minjun. The name came out before she had decided to use it. His eyes moved to hers immediately, sharp and direct. You cannot tattoo enough names onto your body to make yourself responsible for every person a dangerous world decides to use against you. That's not accountability. That's punishment. He looked at her for a very long time. The fortress, she thought, was not falling. Fortresses did not fall in mornings. They did not fall in a single conversation, or a single night, or a single moment of being seen by someone who had spent 14 months learning the architecture of your silences. But they could, she believed this, she had to believe this, develop doors, given the right pressure applied with the right intention over the right amount of time. I rearranged your calendar, he said finally. His voice had shifted, Not softer exactly, but less armored. The last 3 weeks. The client meetings. I know, she said. You didn't say anything. I was waiting to see if you'd tell me. Something moved across his face that she had never seen there before. And she had cataloged everything. She had been cataloging for 14 months. Something that was not quite a smile. Not the performance of warmth, but the involuntary edge of it. Real, and therefore rare, and therefore devastating in its smallness. I'm telling you now, he said. I know, she said again. And this time it meant something different. She did not move toward him. He did not move toward her. They were not people who moved toward things recklessly. Both of them had been shaped by worlds that punished recklessness, that extracted costs from impulsivity that could not always be repaid. But something settled in the room between them, quiet and irreversible, the way things settle when two people have finally said, without saying it directly, something that cannot be unsaid. After a moment, she stood, picked up the quarterly review from his desk. The board needs this by Thursday, she said. The boardroom voice, clean and professional, but with something underneath it now that had not been there before. An awareness, a warmth, a door left fractionally open. I've flagged 3 sections where the language is ambiguous. If Chung pushes back on section 4, I've drafted 2 alternative wordings. Minjun looked at the file she set in front of him, then at her. Caldwell, he said. Sir? The blouse. He paused. His eyes were steady, and in them she saw, fully, finally, without any remaining ambiguity, not possession, not control, not the cold authority of a man who had decided she was something he owned. She saw a man who was terrified of losing something he hadn't yet allowed himself to fully claim. Wear whatever you want. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I know. And she walked out of his office into the gold morning light of the 42nd floor, past the elevator bank and the glass walls and the glittering sprawl of Atlanta below. And she sat at her desk and opened the quarterly review and began to work. And she was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely and quietly certain of exactly where she was. And for the first time in 10 years, behind her in the office with the floor-to-ceiling window, Jung Min-jun, who had learned to breathe like a powerful man in a boardroom, slow and deliberate and controlled, exhaled. Fully. Finally. Like a man who had just, without ceremony or announcement, set something down that he had been carrying for far too long. The story of the Korean boss and his black assistant, a story not of control, but of 2 people, both armored, both broken in their own precise ways, learning, in the particular silence of a 42nd floor in Atlanta, that protection and possession are not the same thing, and that being seen, truly, completely seen, by the right person is not weakness. It is the only thing that ever saved anyone. If this story moved something in you, stop for just a moment and reflect. Have you ever been in a room where someone tried to make you feel like you were too much? Too visible, too bold, too present, when the truth was they were simply afraid of losing you? Have you ever mistaken someone's need to protect you for a need to control you, and almost walked away before you found out the difference? And have you ever watched someone powerful enough to frighten the whole world crumble quietly in front of the one person who finally saw them clearly? Tell us your story in the comments. Every single one gets read. And if you believe in stories about redemption, dignity, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself until it has no choice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.